what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, June 22nd, 2017 here. A little rocky start this morning. My main computer is having some kind of issues. I don't know if it's malware or what it is, but it was right down to the wire getting it up and running for the program this morning. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Mike is in our control room twiddling our dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to put you on the air with your comments and questions. Now, getting on into it, as you know right now, the big story is the GOP health care bill. And again, it is following the structure of the House version of the bill that passed a couple of months ago, but it's running into some difficulty. At least 4 GOP senators are saying they cannot support it in its current form. And, of course, it only takes 3 defecting GOP senators to defeat the bill. So right now the bill is not going to pass as it currently is. A lot of people have got some comments and criticisms about it. And in fact, as that caller who called in yesterday mentioned, one of the big problems, of course, is it's slashing money to Medicaid programs across the country on which a lot of people are now very dependent. And this might be just an effort to drive more and more of the elderly and disabled to seek private insurance. A lot of other people are very concerned. They're calling that this bill has massive tax cuts for the wealthy. That's not exactly what's going on. What they're doing is they're ending the taxes that were added to the wealthy to fund Obamacare. And the last part, and this part I agree with, they're ending the mandate, saying that you have to buy insurance that complies with some arbitrary standard. You don't have to have health insurance. It's not mandated anymore. And I think this is a really good thing. Not because I think people should not have health insurance. I think you should. But as we clearly saw under Obamacare, the ending of the mandate and the call that you had to have these Obamacare compliant policies resulted in a tremendous amount of abuse from the health insurance industry with sky-high premiums and sky-high deductibles, and a lot of people who were forced to give up their existing health insurance and switch to the Obamacare policies suffered serious financial harm, including yours truly, on this very issue. So this ending of the mandate, if the health insurance companies want to stay in business, they're going to have to work to make their products attractive to consumers. And I know in this economy that's a very, very difficult thing to do. People just don't have that kind of money. But it means they're going to have to lower their premiums, they're going to have to lower the deductibles, and they're going to have to improve service to their potential customers, or they're not going to make any sales. And again, when Obamacare was first being pitched, I pointed out the events that happened after automobile insurance was made mandatory. And we went through exactly the same thing. The premiums went up, the quality of service went down, and the corporations got this attitude of, well, they're going to have to buy this from somebody anyway, so we can just do whatever we want. And we saw a huge amount of damage caused by Obamacare, along with the fact that it was hideously inefficient. And if you look at how many doctors have been added to our medical system over the last few years as compared to administrators, you'll see that administrators are outstripping doctors by 5 to 1 to deal with all the complexity and the paperwork. And those administrators are part of the reason that the cost of American medical care is going right through the roof. We have the highest, most expensive medical care on planet Earth, and it is ranked something like 39th in quality. And the average life expectancy of Americans is currently in decline, while the number of Americans who are dealing with chronic multiple illnesses is increasing. So something went wrong here, and I'm not saying that the current repeal and replace Obamacare bill is a real solution. I think we ought to go back to an earlier, simpler time when we had a medical system that was affordable and worked, or we need to go single payer. And, of course, as you know, out in California, there was that study that was done that showed if they went single payer, it would cover everybody in the state of California and save billions and billions of dollars. So I think a lot of the senators here are, well, you know, those who were around when Obama was there. They want to keep helping out the health insurance industries who have been very generous campaign donors. And, of course, all the Democrats are going to vote against this because it's Obamacare. It's got his name on it. It's his signature accomplishment. And we're going to be doing all of this stuff to make sure it is part of his legacy, except, of course, that it is a legacy that really is not working very well. Okay, let's go on over to the war zones. There's a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of people can be forgiven for being very, very concerned about how many wars there are, how long we've been at war in all of these countries, and how there doesn't seem to be an end in sight other than full-on global conflict, which could easily go nuclear. Now, again, back on Monday, I put up these two comparison maps of the situation on the ground in Syria. And we're going to do a quick little shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So back on Monday, I put up these two maps, one from March and one from today, that shows how much ISIS is losing in Syria. And as you know, despite all the rhetoric that the U.S. Was in Syria to get ISIS and al-Qaeda, they've been in there supporting them. And now the U.S. is getting into a panic. They're about to lose in Syria. It would be the first recognized military defeat since Vietnam. And a loss in Syria puts the rest of the war agenda, such as Iran and all these other countries, at serious risk of collapse, and with it the U.S. economy. So basically this article over in antiwar.com is saying that as ISIS loses ground in Syria, the U.S. is now on a collision course with Syria and Iran. And, of course, we know the U.S. has actually been at war with Syria trying to replace Bashar al-Assad for 5 years, and they've been talking about war with Iran for year after year after year. Remember that video of John McCain dancing around on stage going, bomb, 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 Iran, bomb, bomb, bomb? And, you know, he thinks it's a big joke. You know, it's a big joke. And they're trying to link Syria to Iran, where there's some legitimacy, especially after Iran launched missiles onto ISIS inside Syria. They're now trying to link Yemen to Iran. That, like the Russian interfering with our elections, is mostly mythical here. Okay, we're going to grab a quick phone call here. Clinton, Las Vegas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I know you changed subjects, but this is about the healthcare mandate.
Yes.
Here's my really big problem with it, Mike, is that it mandates healthcare. Okay, it's like my union's healthcare. It has procedures that I would never agree with, and you're being forced, okay, this is what we'll cover, even though I would never do chemotherapy. I would never take meds for high cholesterol. I would do that with diet and juicing or whatever. I would never take that stuff. And so that's my biggest problem with mandated health care. It just caters to the big pharmaceutical companies. You put up a post earlier that 97% of people who've had root canals, 97% of people who had terminal cancer had root canals. I just had a tooth came out. It was filled with amalgam, and all the bumps on my legs disappeared, and my brain fog disappeared. So it just mandates health care that isn't even an exact science yet. I mean, you know,
well,
I disagree with a lot.
It's never going to be an exact science, and unfortunately, a lot of things become recommended practice, and then decades later we find out they're dangerous, like the mercury amalgam used in tooth fillings. When it first came on out, everybody said it's great, it's easy to use, and it's 100% safe, even though it's mercury, and mercury at that time was known to be a neurotoxin. And as I was telling Dr. Default during her interview, if you remember the Alice in Wonderland, the character of the Mad Hatter, that was actually based on a real cultural stereotype of the day when Lewis Carroll wrote the book, because milliners making hats were exposed to mercury vapor, and they would go slowly insane over the years. And so in hindsight, it isn't really a surprise that these mercury amalgam fillings were a cause of a lot of chronic health issues.
And they want that. My dentist she was actually spraying my teeth once. This was about 15 years ago with fluoride. I'm trying to fight these cavities, and I said, get that rat poison out of my mouth. And she goes, oh, no, this is all approved stuff. And I go, maybe you should do a little search on Google. And she was very embarrassed because they only know what they're taught.
Yes.
And I'll give you another example with my bronchitis. I have found out that there was a video that you posted once about this guy in New Zealand had pneumonia, and his family demanded IVs of vitamin C, and it completely cured him. And when they were giving him liposol vitamin C, and when I tried it, it was the only thing that has ever worked on my bronchitis and my acute coughing. Mm-hmm. And I've lived with that all my life. I'm 60 years old, and now I finally have something that works every time. It works within a few hours. And the doctors don't know this stuff, and they probably couldn't prescribe it even if they wanted to. It's not the best system in the world, our medical system.
Well, no, because it's become completely corrupted by big money. I mean, back during Richard Nixon's term in office, they basically changed the laws that limited the amount of profit medical facilities could make off the patients, because they understood patients, except for plastic surgery, which can go horribly wrong. Patients don't choose to get sick. They don't choose to be injured. And it was considered unfair of the medical establishment to try and exploit people for illness and injury. But that all went away when Richard Nixon basically helped change the laws that turned the medical establishment away from health care and to basically another profit-based enterprise, the health maintenance organizations. And unfortunately, we are getting dangerously close to where you're going to be forced to take certain treatments whether you want them or not. We're already at the stage right now where they're mandating vaccines, and who knows what's going to be next. And as far as your doctors and dentists and other medical practitioners, more and more of the curriculum at their medical schools is now being set by the providers of pharmaceuticals and instruments and other equipment.
Right. And California, if a doctor says your kid has cancer and you don't put them on chemo, they can come and take your kids.
Yes.
Unbelievable. And
no, it's very believable in the fascist states of America. All right, thank you for the call, Clint. We're going to let you go here. And getting on out here, let's see, Battle for Mosul. There is a little bit of a disagreement. Apparently, this mosque, the Al-Nuri Kabir Mosque, which is in old Mosul, and that's where ISIS leader al-Baghdadi proclaimed a caliphate back in 2014. It has been blown up, and according to this article that we got out of Southfront, ISIS blew it up. They seem really big on blowing up other people's buildings, especially archaeological remains. However, ISIS is saying the mosque was actually destroyed in a U.S. airstrike. So kind of hard to know who to believe on that one, given that everybody's lying about war. In fact, I think it was Senator Hiram Johnson said truth is the first casualty of war. And we're certainly getting a textbook example of that right now. The Russian Foreign Ministry has declared that the U.S. buildup in southern Syria does violate international law. And it does. It's basically an invasion of another sovereign nation. There's been no congressional declaration of war. There is no resolution from the United Nations Security Council. The United States government has no legal right to be in Syria whatsoever. And the U.S. government is clearly in the wrong, legally and morally here. But that's never stopped them before, unfortunately. Now, there's another article, this came out of Sputnik News, talking about eventual U.S. plans for Syria, emphasizing that they're not making any commitment to territorial integrity. In other words, they're already talking about breaking Syria up, giving part of it to the Kurds, maybe Israel gets the Golan Heights for keeps. And again, it's another example of the stunning double standards and hypocrisies that come out of Washington, D.C., because when Crimea voted to leave Ukraine, the United States opposed it, refused to recognize the referendum, saying that Ukraine's territorial integrity had to be preserved, even though the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights gives everybody in every member nation of the United Nations the right to vote to secede, to go away and form their own country. And the United States, both as a member of the United Nations and the host country to the United Nations, simply ignored that to demonize Crimea. And because they refused to recognize the referendum, the default situation is Russia stole Crimea. And we're still hearing that all over the media, Russia stole Crimea. And as I said, it makes about as much logical sense as a guest at a wedding declaring that the bride did not have a right to marry the groom, therefore by default the groom has kidnapped and raped the bride. That's about as much logical sense as it makes here. Now, Australia has decided they're going to resume their airstrikes in Syria when Russia came on out, said that any non-Syrian, non-Russian aircraft flying west of the Euphrates would be tracked and treated as a potential target and asked to leave, and if they refused, could be shot down. Australia said, well, we're going to pull on out. Apparently somebody got a phone call down there in Canberra, and because today they're saying, yes, they're going to rejoin the U.S. coalition and blow things up like mosques and whatnot. Meanwhile, France's President Emmanuel Macron is basically signaling that France is abandoning the policy of regime change in Syria, saying that there's no legitimate successor to Assad, and getting rid of Assad is just going to flood Europe with millions more refugees, and it could actually cause an escalation of the war into a regional war across the entire Middle East, or even worse, World War III, and he's absolutely right about that. So France's participation in the coalition in Syria is now going to be limited specifically to attacking ISIS. So France is actually being the good guy over there, although France does not have Syria's government permission to be there either. Very alarming story, and hardly the only person saying this, and again, this is from antiwar.com. The U.S. and Russia continue to inch toward confrontation in Syria. And that's exactly what's going on. The U.S. is now directly attacking Syrian forces. I think we're up to a count of 5 now. They're clearly sending a message. And remember that Sukhoi 22 that was shot down by the United States. And by the way, that may have been retaliation for al-Baghdadi being killed. But for whatever reason, there were Russian aircraft in the area. And that U.S. warplane could have shot one of the Russians down very easily. But again, the goal may have been, they got a pilot who was willing to take the risk, flew up there, shot down the Syrian Sukhoi in the hope that the Russians would then engage him, and that would open up a door to say, well, Russia has attacked the American aircraft, therefore the war is on. But at this point, it's getting hard to find anybody who isn't deeply concerned that we are clearly headed to a direct military confrontation with the Russians. And I don't think that's really a good idea. Now, Turkey is concentrating its troops around the Kurdish city of Afrin in Syrian Kurdistan. And so, obviously, the signals are going on out that there's going to be an offensive on that city. This is coming from the Syrian Kurds. And they're digging in and getting ready to deal with that here. Apparently up in Afghanistan, there was a car bomb explosion outside the New Kabul Bank. 22 killed, 54 injured. Now, getting back on down to Qatar, the Saudis have a new list of demands for Qatar. And apparently it's a little bit longer than the last one. It includes what was on the last list. Nobody really knows what's on it. Other than severing all diplomatic ties with Iran, the permanent shutdown of Al Jazeera, and a pledge never to publicly contradict any GCC member nations. So, basically taking them off the political board. Okay, we should be hearing music. There it is. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here, and we're still dealing with technical issues, and I'm sorry for any loud noises that went out over our BAM user feed, but This equipment is old and corroded, and of course in Hawaii's salt air, everything acts like it's made out of compressed rust. And actually, under the poor quality manufacturing of the United States, maybe that's exactly what they're doing. They just get some rust and corrosion, put it in a mold, slap it on, put some paint on it, and say, see, this is a quality product here. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
It's mainly like kind of security question on, you know, as when you call certain businesses, they say this phone call may be recorded, and they have to have your authorization to record that. Now, taking that and referring to what's going on with the James Comey possible tapes that may exist or not exist, when you walk into, the question is, if you walk into the Oval Office and you sit down and have a talk, is it at his discretion to record? Is there always a recording going of conversations in that room?
Well, obviously, when Richard Nixon did it, that was a huge upset. But as it turned out, a lot of presidents have done it. Lyndon Johnson did it. The idea is you never find out about it until it's used as blackmail material. But technically, under the law, it's illegal to record somebody without their knowledge. Now, some states have a law where everybody must know the message is being, or the conversation is being recorded. In some states, only one party has to know the conversation is being recorded. And in all states, if you're recording somebody else's conversation, that is definitely against the law. The problem with government is that they basically don't follow the law. But Trump has hedged his bets on this. He's out there saying that he himself has not made any recordings, but with all the surveillance going on all over, he has no idea if recordings actually exist of his conversations with Comey. So he's kind of coming down on both sides. A little bit of uncharacteristic weasel wording coming out of Donald Trump. But again, it's an honest assessment. Everything is compromised. You can be spied on with your cell phone. Unless you're in a Faraday cage and you've left all your electronics outside, it's very hard to presume that anything you say is in privacy. Now, as far as when you call, for example, a customer service line and they say, we're recording, we need your permission, what that really is doing is trying to reassure you that they're going to give you the best service that they can, rather than actually recording it. And I imagine that in some companies they actually do make the recording, but it's more to make sure that their employees are doing the proper job rather than actually invade the privacy of the customer.
In the news today, they were talking, James Comey was quoted as saying, I hope there are recordings of our conversations. So, I don't know, he's throwing it back at Donald Trump. But I was just curious about the legality of it, because I always understood you have to inform somebody this can be recorded, and they have to have your authorization for that. But a government, you know, like I said, they break the rules all the time. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Hey, one other last thing. I was listening to, in my drive around town today, listened to Terry Gross and her show on NPR. I call it Foul Air because that's actually what it's become, the show. But she had an expert on there talking about how they believe Russia is doing cyber attacks. Their little guinea pig is Ukraine as their test pilot of cyber attacks against Ukraine. And the thing I had a problem with is they're always using speculation as fact.
Yes.
And I just see that all the time in their broadcasts as speculation. Might be, maybe, it could be. They believe all these words of speculation, but they try to pass them off as fact. And, of course, the Russia bashing continues on.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. Now, I don't know what the current state of Russia's cyber weaponry is, but looking at all that's coming out of WikiLeaks and the Vault 7 dump, it's very obvious that the United States has invested huge amounts of money building the weapons with which to wage cyber war. And remember, it was uncovered one of the specialized cyber war units was set up to carry out cyber attacks on targets and plant evidence to make it look like it came from a different place, like from Russia or China.
Right.
So speculation where the stuff comes from, you don't really know. Steve, got to let you go.
You're referring to the Vault 7 stuff, right?
Yeah, that's the Vault 7 stuff. All right, Steve, we got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And getting on into our news here. France rolls out the red carpet for Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. This is considered a continuance of Macron's reset of French-Russian relations. And this may coincide with Macron's decision to no longer seek the ouster of Assad down in Syria. Now, Russia's Deputy Minister of Economic Development, Alexei Gruzdev, is saying that Moscow has renewed intergovernmental cooperation with two-thirds of the European Union's member states, despite the tensions with Brussels. So what this is telling us is the individual member states of the European Union are hopping off this U.S.-Brussels anti-Russia bandwagon. They don't want to go along with it. And again, the reason is they can see the signs. This next world war, like the two before it, is going to be fought in part on their front lawns. And they don't want that. No sane person would. And again, Americans, we don't really have any reminders of war in our country. There are a few preserved battlefields, and those are now under attack by the PC open border, get rid of the Confederacy people. You know, the statues and monuments are being taken down. At some point, they're going to just say, well, we should just turn over these battlefields to, shopping mall developers. You wait, that'll be coming. Apparently, the Balkans are heating up again, and everybody was kind of hoping that after Kosovo had their war of secession from Serbia in the 1990s, that it might stabilize for a while, but apparently everybody's talking about moving those borders around again here. Now, down in Israel, Ehud Barak is out there saying that Israel faces a slippery slope towards apartheid, which is kind of a study in the obvious. Although he is saying that we're not apartheid yet, but we're heading that way. Actually, I think you're there. Even people from the former government of South Africa are saying that Israel is an apartheid state. Now, a lot of people are starting to wonder who Nikki Haley is actually working for, because she's supposed to be the United States ambassador to the United Nations. But it seems like all she ever does while she's up there is talk about Israel and how unfair the United Nations is to Israel and how unfair the United Nations Human Rights Council is to Israel, and they should not be, ganging up on Israel, and Israel is wonderful. Well, she's going to be working for Israel. She should be Israel's ambassador to the UN, and we need to get a new one who's going to take care of this country. So, moving on here. Let's talk about weapons here. There is one area where our weapons are the best in the world, and for the most part seem to work, and that's the drones. And there's an article out here in AFSA.org talking about killer drones and the militarization of the U.S. foreign policy. And remember, when the drones were first introduced, they were for surveillance only. Now they're mounting missiles on them and bombs on them, and they're using them as attack aircraft. And again, this expands the number of countries the U.S. government is now militarily involved in, because there are countries where the U.S. will send in drone strikes. We don't have tanks there, we don't have airplanes there, we don't have boots on the ground. We're not theoretically at war with them, but they'll send in the drones and blow people up saying, well, we're going after the terrorists. And they identify targets by profiling. And these suspected terrorists never get their day in court. There's no evidence saying that they are who somebody thinks they are. But it's not going to win us any more friends in these countries. And again, one of the worst abuses of the profiling was this idea that the taller men could be assumed to be militants or in ISIS or Al-Qaeda. And this drone operator saw a group of people walking across the street. One guy was exceptionally tall. So we targeted them, and it turned out to be a school teacher and the kids just walking across the street. Totally innocent people blown to shreds. Now, nobody is going to respect any government that dishes out punishment that punishes the innocent. Nobody's going to respect that at all. The whole idea of war crimes, the Geneva Convention, all those various conventions on war, is to confine the battle between active military forces in order to protect the civilians who are not part of what is going on. And the U.S., unfortunately, is targeting a lot of civilians. Over in Syria, they may have killed more civilians than ISIS has. Now, we were talking the other day about down in Saudi Arabia, where there's been a major change. King Salman has basically declared his son, Mohammed bin Salman, as heir to the throne, and basically kicked his nephew out of the job. And it turns out that Mohammed bin Salman is very pro-U.S., pro-West, and so a lot of people are very concerned that Saudi Arabia, especially if the older King Salman passes away, that Saudi Arabia is going to be even more cooperative with the United States in proxy wars in the Middle East like the one going on in Yemen right now. Yesterday we talked about North Korea putting an offer on the table where they would declare a moratorium on the testing of nuclear weapons and ICBMs as long as the United States and South Korea and Japan and the rest of them would basically pull away from the Korean Peninsula and stop sailing along their borders and just rattling the sabers. And there is a lesson of history to go back and look at. We have talked many times about how Franklin Roosevelt spent the year before the attack on Pearl Harbor goading Japan, following this 8-step plan by Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum. And one of the steps was to constantly sail American warships along the coast of Japan, which to Americans wouldn't seem like any kind of a big deal. We're used to our warships going anywhere in the world. But to the Japanese sensibilities, it was a horrible insult. It was an affront. And the same thing applies to the North Koreans. So a lot of people would like to see North Korea back down. Even Secretary of Defense Mattis is saying, we really don't want to go in there. And so it would be nice to calm that one down. All the more so because the most recent test of a ballistic missile interceptor, which happened last night, failed miserably. Apparently, they launched a medium-range ballistic missile from the Pacific Missile Range Facility, which is over on the next island out that way. And the destroyer John Paul Jones, which is running the top of the line, the brand new Aegis Baseline 9C2 combat system, fired a Standard Missile 3 Block 2A, also the latest and greatest, and they missed the target. It is not a reliable weapon system. And anybody who is being goaded to the point of nuclear combat with the United States of America is going to realize all they need to do is double up the number of missiles, and there's a good chance one of them is going to get through. Because the overall success rate of these ballistic missile interceptors is less than 50%. Now, they were trumpeting about the successful intercept for the last 3 tests before this one in a row, but there was a whole string of failures before that. And you look at Russia and how many tens of thousands of warheads they have. You can fire off a MIRV missile and just tell, 2 MIRVs per city. There's a good chance one of them will get through. And don't forget, this ballistic missile interceptor was aiming at the entire rocket. Aiming at a MIRV reentry vehicle, that's a lot more difficult. That cone shape is a naturally radar stealthy shape, and it's surrounded, during reentry through the atmosphere, it's surrounded by an ionization cloud that it just sucks up radio signals. In the early days of space flight, When the Mercury and Gemini craft were coming back to Earth during reentry, there was no radio communication, no telemetry whatsoever. And, in fact, same thing with Apollo. And it wasn't until the space shuttle and what was called the TDRS satellites, there are 3 of them up in geostationary orbit, able to send messages straight down to the shuttle during reentry, that they were able to communicate during reentry because of that ionization shield. So it's really an almost impossible task here, and they've had another failure. And I hope that will inspire a certain degree of caution. Now, speaking of North Korea, as you know, there's this big stink over this Otto Warmbier, who was a student that went to North Korea and was thrown in jail, we are told, for stealing a propaganda poster. 15 years does seem a little bit extreme. But apparently people are digging into his background. And over at Gilad Otzman's website, he's put together a little précis saying that Otto may have been an Israeli spy, because Israel and North Korea are not exactly the best of friends. North Korea refuses to recognize Israel, and apparently in 1988 it recognized the state of Palestine. And so there's a little bit of hostility there, and Otto himself apparently went on the usual tour of Israel. He was involved in Hillel, Zionist affiliation. And so there's a possibility that he was actually arrested and locked up for espionage, in which case a sentence of 15 years is certainly reasonable. A lot of spies are shot in wartime. And again, look at the Israeli spy that sold out America's nuclear secrets, Jonathan Pollard. He got a life sentence. So let's get back to our domestic policies here and all of this swirling around all these various probes into Russian interference, or was it obstruction of justice, and this and that, and it's going back. Something very weird is going on over at the House Intelligence Probe involving Russian interference in the 2016 election. And apparently one of the key witnesses is a former informal advisor to the Trump campaign, Carter Page. You've probably heard that name before. And he was scheduled to testify at a closed hearing of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. But Democrats on the committee blocked the testimony. Now, this is the guy that Democrats said was the supposed mastermind of this link to Russia, and you would think they're interested in hearing his story. But no, we don't. We need more time. We'll reschedule him for a few months down the road. Maybe they're afraid of another embarrassment like happened with James Comey, where they actually get him up under oath and he says, no, there was no obstruction of justice and we found no evidence of Russian collusion. But this whole Russiagate thing is a giant flop. And the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton, liberals in general, and the corporate media literally bet the farm that the Russiagate investigation was going to get Donald Trump out of office and then catapult Democrats to victories in this year, in 2018 and 2020. The gamble is not paying off. The elections in Georgia and South Carolina were actually quite a shock to the liberal Democrats. They thought they had a lock on it. Even the corporate media, especially CNN, they were out there saying, oh, yes, this is the Democrats' comeback. This is a voter mandate on Donald Trump's presidency. And then the Republicans won, despite being tremendously overspent. Voters are sick and tired of this stuff. They're sick and tired of the liberal Democrats, and they know that this Russiagate is a big pile of USDA choice bovine excrement. Amazingly enough, the corporate media has been shoving this Russia stole the election narrative down the throats of the American people. And it really hasn't worked. Earlier today there was an interview on Fox News where they're out there saying, well, we found no evidence of Russian interference with the election, which means they didn't succeed in altering the votes or the outcome, but that shouldn't be construed to mean that they weren't trying to do it. So they're still trying to salvage this whole thing. They were still trying to salvage this whole thing. Now then, Fox News was the only corporate media outlet that aired the full Trump rally last night in Cedar Rapids, Indiana. And everybody else cut away. And Trump has called out CNN on their habit of cutting the feed. Remember, again, in that Georgia 6th District special election, CNN carried the entirety of the Democratic loser's concession speech and only a couple of minutes of the Republican victor's speech. Then they cut away. Oh, we've got more important things to show you here. CNN got caught with a big goof. As you know, there was a little bit of kerfuffle over the Black Sea where an F-16 was very close to the airplane carrying Russia's defense minister, and it was chased off by a Sukhoi. And CNN actually reported it as being the Russian ambassador on board the plane, even though the event happened nearly 24 hours ago. So CNN has to be seen as one of the world's most poorly edited news websites. They don't go back and check their stories. They just put on out whatever they think, and then they wonder why they're losing audience. Meanwhile, the Democratic Election Commissioner, Ellen Weintraub, is trying to revive the Russia did it narrative, demanding probes of Russian links to Facebook, Drudge, Huffington Post, and say, my faith in democracy is shaken by all this Russian interference. And again, as Putin actually said, and Oliver Stone said, Israel interferes with our elections all the time. Nobody makes a stink about that. The U.S. interferes with other countries' elections all the time. Why is it only a bad thing when we think and cannot prove that Russia maybe, kind of, sort of, possibly did it here? Okay, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And let me just shut something down. I'm still dealing with some issues on my computer here. Now, everyone, of course, is talking about this new special counsel, Robert Mueller, former head of the FBI. And, of course, we're all supposed to think that anybody who's head of the FBI is just a swell person. Anybody who studied the history of J. Edgar Hoover understands that is simply not so. Certainly we know that Mueller, when he was head of the FBI with James Comey as his assistant, was overseeing these post-9/11 abuses of innocent Arabs. And we need to remember that this guy does not follow the Constitution or the rule of law or the Bill of Rights. He's a hatchet man. And that's why they brought him back to go after Donald Trump here. Now, Trey Gowdy, boy, I love this guy. And I'm glad he's now in a position to be able to do more investigation. Basically went after Jay Johnson on a very important issue about the DNC's claim that they were hacked by the Russians. And Gowdy just asked a very pointed question. Why would the victim of a crime not turn over a server? And that really cuts to the heart of the matter. If your house is robbed and the police come on out there and you say, well, no, you can't come in and look around, what are they going to think? Insurance fraud? And that's very legitimate. And as it turns out, nobody looked at that server. Nobody did a forensic examination from within the government. The FBI didn't. The Department of Homeland Security didn't. The CIA never did. The only basis for the claim Russia hacked the DNC servers came from CrowdStrike, a company that was working for the DNC and the Hillary campaign. And they retracted their statements last March and are refusing to testify in front of Congress. There is absolutely no basis for the continuing claim that Russia hacked the DNC servers. There is a considerable amount of evidence that those emails were walked out of the DNC by Seth Rich on a thumb drive. There's far more evidence for that than there is of Russian hacking. But the Democrats, the Hillaryites, the corporate media, again, they have bet the farm on this story of Russia hacking the DNC computers, and that's why they're trying so hard to ignore all of the new stuff that's coming out about Seth Rich, including that report from the Profiling Project that says the reason Seth Rich still had his wallet, watch, and cell phone was that he was killed by a hired killer. Now, as you know, Hillary Clinton has re-entered the popular fray. There's the music. We're going to do a station identification. More about Hillary when we come back after these few words.